ADHD. It's something I never thought I'd be talking about, not to mention something that would completely change the way that I understand myself. This is a part of my story that I've kept quiet about until recently, but today I want to open up. My name's Jack Thompson. I'm a professional athlete, and last year, age 35, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Getting diagnosed wasn't just about putting a label on a bunch of quirks. It was about finally making sense of a lifetime of challenges and triumphs that I never fully understood. And I hope that by sharing my story, I can help somebody else feel less alone. November 2023. At the conclusion of our Mundabitty Dreaming project back in Perth, we were driving to one of the schools for our first mental health presentation, and one of the fellows in the team asked me, "Have you ever thought about getting tested for ADHD?" It really caught me by surprise because I hadn't, and that's because I'd always thought ADHD was hyperactive kids who couldn't sit still, and looking back, that definitely wasn't me. As a child, I was not bouncing off the walls. I was the opposite. I was kind of just away with the fairies, thinking about something else. And so I figured it didn't apply. And in hindsight, having spoken with my parents, they thought the same thing. But something about the question stuck with me, especially given his role working inside a mental health clinic back in Perth. And I was really fortunate because the company he worked for, Okia, they offered me an appointment with one of their psychiatrists, just in case it was something I wanted to explore. And after some careful thinking, I decided to go for it. In the meantime, I started doing research online and listening to audiobooks about ADHD. And it's worth noting that they were audiobooks because I've never been able to read a normal book. I've just found that the words don't get absorbed into my brain. And the more I learned about ADHD, the more I started to realize that I actually experience a lot of the less typical symptoms. This was good because I was learning more about why some of my behaviors are the way they are. But I guess it also made me nervous because I started to think, what if this isn't the answer? What if it's just me being bad at life? When the diagnosis came back, I was diagnosed with combined ADHD. And without going into too much detail, there's two different types of ADHD. There's impulsive ADHD, inattentive ADHD, and combined ADHD, which is a combination of the two. And I had the latter, which means that I'm both impulsive, tattoos, adrenaline junkie, often fiery, but I'm also inattentive. If I'm not the slightest bit interested in something, then I'm not interested at all. I felt this overwhelming sense of relief that it wasn't just me, that there was a reason that my brain worked the way it did, and I struggled with certain things and excelled at others. And for the first time, it was quite powerful. I felt seen, and that I wasn't broken, but in fact, perhaps there was an opportunity for me to use my ADHD as a real strength. Living with ADHD feels like standing on the side of a highway that you're trying to cross, but the traffic never stops. There's cars honking, there's motorbikes racing by, it's chaos. And that's what my brain feels like all the time. It's a constant flood of thoughts, distractions, and noise. Simple things overwhelm me. If I've got more than 2 tasks to do in a day, like going to the shops and hanging out the washing, it feels like too much and I get overwhelmed and almost hide from doing anything. But at the same time, I can hyperfixate on something I love, like the cycling, for hours. But like I said, if it's something I'm not interested in, then forget it. The motivation just isn't there. Now, if I look back, growing up, this showed up in a million ways. I'd pick up a new hobby or a sport and I'd get obsessed with it for a few weeks and then I'd drop it completely. At school, like I said, I've never been able to read. It was impossible. I'd sit there staring at the pages, frustrated because I just couldn't focus. And then at home, I'd spend hours, trying to make the information sink in because I genuinely did want to do well, but I couldn't. And this led to like a bunch of negative self-talk because I was trying so hard, but it didn't make any difference. And even now, the ADHD shows up in my adult life. Sometimes I hyper-focus on my cycling position, and my friends and family know me for this. Like, to the point where I don't even want to write because I'm so fixated on a simple, insignificant asymmetry with my pedal stroke or the way I'm sitting on the saddle. In all honesty, I generally don't like to ride in a group because I'm so conscious about the fact that the person behind me is actually watching my asymmetries, and it stresses me out. It's exhausting, but it's also just my reality. Managing the ADHD has been a journey, and it's something I've been doing for years now, not really knowing that I had ADHD. For me, what I've found is that I need to create structure in the chaos. I'm obsessed with lists. My phone's full of them. I write down everything. Plans, ideas, and even the most basic tasks. That's how I make the world feel less overwhelming, less confronting. Routine's also been a lifesaver. Every night before bed, I plan out the next day, but not just as a to-do list, as a complete daily schedule. Everything has a time allocation and notes next to it so that I know that when that time comes, I know exactly what I've got to do. It might sound small, but waking up with a clear plan, it really does help me feel grounded. Cycling's also been therapy. I've started to use the term meditation in motion because when I'm on the bike or I'm surfing or just generally active, the sense of calm that I experience really gives me an edge. That same intensity that makes those daily tasks really hard, it's also energy that I can channel towards big goals. And I think it's what actually lets me push further than most. So I may see this as controversial, but medications played a big role for me too. It did take a while to find the right medication and the right dose, but now I finally feel like I can think clearly. I have a calm inside my mind like I've never had before. And I like to describe the effect that the medications had using the example that if life was a game of Tetris, I feel like I've been playing Tetris with one arm tied behind my back. I've just never been able to adjust those falling pieces so that they slot into place. But now that I have both arms free, I can control the things that are going around me more in the way that I want them to be. And I guess life's become less challenging. It's less of a challenge. There's so many misconceptions about ADHD. Like I said, I used to think it was just hyperactive kids, but it's so much more. It affects focus, emotions, motivation, literally every part of your life. While I'm talking about stigmas, I want to talk about medication for a minute. And like I said, it might be controversial because there is a stigma attached to it. You'll take the stimulants, that's a drug. But here's the truth. ADHD is a diagnosed medical condition. If you had diabetes, you wouldn't hesitate to use insulin. If you had a rare skin condition, you wouldn't feel guilty if a doctor told you that you needed to use the special skin cream. For me, taking the ADHD medication is no different. I've been through a thorough testing and diagnosis process. I've spoken at length with both my psychiatrist but also other health professionals. And I've come to the conclusion that for me, I guess everyone for that matter, our goal as humans should be to live our best lives. And if that means taking medication because our body is deficient in something, or our body doesn't work quite the way it's supposed to, then why should we feel ashamed about it? ADHD isn't all bad though. My hyperfocus has definitely helped me to achieve some incredible things. I guess it's why I've been able to push myself to the limits as an ultra cyclist. And the routines I've built to manage the ADHD, they've made me more disciplined and organised in, I guess, every other area of my life. But I won't lie, it is still a challenge. But I've realised that ADHD isn't something to manage. It's something I can use. It's the reason I've been able to push through circumstances that others write off as impossible. It's why I've broken records and the reasons I've been able to turn my passion into my career. I've started to realise that ADHD isn't a weakness. It's my edge. I could go on and on, but I think as a first video on the topic, it's probably enough. If any of this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you're standing on that highway, overwhelmed by the chaos, know that you're not alone. ADHD is tough, but it's also manageable. If you're wondering whether you or a loved one might have ADHD, I really encourage you to seek the answers. My experience has shown that it is 200% worthwhile. So thanks for letting me share my story. If this video has helped or inspired you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe. Over the coming months, I'm going to try and share more about what it's like as a professional athlete or as a human with ADHD, and go into more detail about some of my triggers, my coping mechanisms, and how I use it to my advantage, just to get the most out of life. So yeah, thanks for listening.